Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Awesome Wholesaler Experience podcast, where we look into the many facets of the job, the career, and the lifestyle of product wholesaling. I'm your host, Awesome Mike, and today's guest, ladies and gentlemen, is another icon in the industry, very special guest. Let me tell you about him just a little bit. Mr. Art Delorenzo. CLU, ChFC, CFP, MSFS, MSEd, has been involved in the financial services since 1968. 1968. Art, that must be a typo. Sorry about that. Now, initially, he started his career out as a financial advisor for Investors Diversified Services, more commonly known as IDS in the industry. But that was in Cortland, New York, and he quickly moved into a leadership role as a district sales manager in Syracuse. Fast forward all the way to 1984, when American Express bought IDS, Art accepted the position of division manager, which was a big deal, actually, and in the Melville office for all of Long Island and Staten Island. Now, in 2000, fast forward again, Art became one of the coveted positions in the company, Group Vice President of the Upstate New York and Vermont Market Group, and that's where he retired from the financial services industry as an employee, I should say, in 2005. Now, during that time, he made market improvements in sales across the board. He was a champion and an icon in the industry, to say the least. Now, Mr. Delorenzo is a founding partner of MYT, Mike Yankee Tango, or Maximizing Your Talents Group. And he launched that as a formal business entity in 2009. But prior to that, pilot after pilot after pilot test proved that the MYT process could, in fact, lower stress and therefore improve productivity. Now, Art had a defining moment way back in 1999 when he was given a book by Mikey Woodard, Big Mike. I know that guy, great guy. Hopefully he's doing well. It's been a while. But anyways, Art was given this book called Working with Emotional Intelligence by Daniel Goleman. Now, prior to this, Art had collected influential behaviors in his spiral notebook that he actually he acknowledges as highly effective. And it was from that notebook where he taught others and really began the origin of his current platform today. Now, Art's extremely proud of his family. He's been married to his lovely bride, Deborah, for over 42 years. Holy cow, Art. I'm sure that's about, 20 of her best years of her life. He has 4 children, 7 grandsons, and 2 granddaughters. He is an accomplished, mediocre golfer. Love that, Art. He retired from mountain climbing, like literal mountain climbing, in 2016 after summiting many significant mountains in the U.S. and in the Himalayas. And then in 2010, Art was inducted into the Castleton University Athletic Hall of Fame for his MVP contribution to the 1964 NAIA Co-Championship soccer team. Wow. However, that's not the only Hall of Fame that Art is in. Art actually holds the distinction of being the only field leader in the Ameriprise Hall of Fame. Congratulations on that, Art. He and his wife share some time between their homes in New York City and Martha's Vineyard. Welcome to the show, Mr. Art Delorenzo. How are you, sir?
I'm fine, Mike. How about yourself?
I'm doing well, and I appreciate you having such a glamorous and illustrious biography. I actually cut a lot of some of the details off of that. However, we still are out of time after reading that biography, so thanks for being on the show. Appreciate that. But in all seriousness, which mountaintop was your favorite to summit?
Well, the one that has the most significant emotional attachment to me was Island Peak, which is right next to Everest. And sometime when we have some private time, I'll tell you about the emotional piece because it'll tear me up. and anyway, that was the finest. That was most wonderful.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And how did you get started in mountain climbing?
I was sitting in a theater in Australia, in Sydney, and my wife and I had gone over to visit our daughter who was on a college semester abroad thing, And she was busy with her pals and what have you. So Deb and I went to the movies, and we saw the movie Everest. And I sat there, and this was in 2000, and I said to her, I can do that, and I want to do that. So that's what launched it. I started training. I had always had a fascination with mountains, even when I was a kid, but it didn't allow me the luxury of doing that when you have 4 kids and 9 grandchildren. It just the time was never there, but the time was coming close as I was nearing my retirement. And so that's when I started training and working and exploring, researching, and so that's how it got started.
You know, I also have 4 children, so I kind of can empathize a bit there. And no grandkids yet. My oldest is only 19, so I'm going to give him some time to find himself before he finds a grandkid. Plus, I think I'm a little bit too young to be a grandfather. At least I act too young. But let me ask you this question, Art. They say that true climbers know the answer to this. And the question is, why climb a mountain?
Yeah, it's a proverbial answers out of all the books I've read is because it's there.
Because it's there.
But there's a tremendous amount of joy with it. But if you've been following some of the tragedies that have occurred on Everest this year, it's a painful reminder about us as human beings that we sometimes drive our passion for something, and we don't always recognize the appropriate risk for that, and that's what happened with and has happened numerous times. So one of my biggest takeaways from all my research was I committed to my wife and my kids and my grandchildren that I would not go past a point where I thought there was undue risk, and so I never did. I never used oxygen. That was another guiding principle that I had for myself. I wanted to see how high I could go, which was 22,000 feet. And I could have probably gone another 1,000 feet. I'm sure I could have. There was no more mountain to climb, so I didn't have that opportunity. But I felt it's about where my cap was. So just a little mountain climbing.
Yeah, that's terrific. And it really is relevant because taking risk and really being alive is what you've done your whole life. And you've helped others do it with your work as a financial advisor and then also in the management and leadership as well. You know, I started my career back actually in 1999 as an American Express financial advisor.
Oh my gosh, I didn't know that.
Yeah. Well, I'm not in any Hall of Fame anywhere because of it. So you probably wouldn't know of it. In fact, I could say that I was actually, what's the word? I was not an imposter, but I was impersonating a financial advisor back then. No, it was an interesting time, and Ameriprise and American Express Financial Advisors, its predecessor has definitely established itself as one of the longstanding icons in the business. And honestly, no short of saying that you helped contribute to that. I mean, that's a legitimate claim, and I appreciate you doing that. And I'm sure that a lot of people also do that as well. Your work, though, in 1968, fast forward to 1988, fast forward to 2008, that's a long time. That's a lot of evolution. What are some of the principles that you've seen that haven't changed? Some principles that are still relevant today that we can share with the audience so that they can build their bedrock or their base camp for their business and for their life? What are the cores?
Well, I think one of them is that having a genuine belief that your practice, your financial planning practice, is literally helping the nation. And if every advisor looked at the scale of advisors all across the country, one of the things I've always been jealous of, if you will, is the fact that the nation doesn't grab the importance of the work that our financial advisors do. And it's because it's singular. It's one advisor, one client, one advisor, one client. You help them. You help educate their kids. You get them retired. You you solve the misery of the knocks on the door that you prepared them for that weren't pleasant, like disabilities or premature deaths. And so your career is kind of lost in this one client advisor relationship at a time. And I wish there was some way that the nation could see the collective good that our advisors do and how they contribute to the well-being of this nation. The other thing I would suggest is that the Financial Planning Association, I've spent the last 2 or 3 years giving them some help. And they're wonderful people. The work that they do to support their field people, their chapter presidents, and training them and supporting them is just tremendous. And hardly anybody knows it outside of the profession. So if you're an advisor, I just ask you to accept that role the way it is and do it gallantly, do it honestly, do it, with character and integrity. And that's kind of a segue into why MYT even came about, because we recognize that it's a challenge. The stress is a challenge.
Yeah, we definitely want to go deep into MYT. Let me dig a little deeper into the statement you just made, though, about the state of the industry. And Art, do you think that our world has changed irrevocably? And what I mean by that is you spent your entire career at one firm, essentially. You've been married to one woman for the greater majority of your life. That's not what happens today. Today, people, even back in the day, Michael Jordan, Larry Bird, Magic Johnson, they played for one basketball team. Okay. The idea of loyalty is gone now. It's really a, everyone for themselves kind of mentality in the marketplace. I've experienced it personally. I've wholesaled for several different companies, and it's not uncommon. The financial advisor today is jumping from insurance-based company to RIA, wirehouse to independent, back and forth, jumping around. What are your comments about that? And do you think that that's probably part of the reason for the challenges in the industry?
Well, first of all, everybody has a set of values, and loyalty is my fourth value. And so if I'm going to live my values, I felt this insistence that I stay and do everything that I could in that arena that I was, that I was blessed to walk into. And so everybody has to have their own values. Sometimes people have values that are more financial focused. It's me focused and not you or other focused. And so I think as the economies of the world have blossomed over the last 20, 30 years, and more people have more and more resources, there is a tendency for people to want more. And the perfect story about that is in Cannes, France, when there was a big Cannes Film Festival, and I've been there and I've seen the harbor, and the harbor's lined up with yachts, one after the other, and a handful of the yacht owners are sitting and wringing their hands because someone has a yacht that's so big that it couldn't come into the harbor. And they were all thinking, one day I'm going to get up. Well, if that's your value, then your behavior will follow that. So again, these are just personal perspectives. So I think that is a challenge, and I don't think it's how much you get paid out that's a challenge. I don't think it's who your branding is that's so much of a challenge, as it is having the character, inside character, to say I want to serve these clients, and that's more important than anything else I can do.
Yeah, those are old school values, unfortunately. And you know, I was reading and I read, and I'll paraphrase. There is a huge void, a gap of 30-something-year-olds getting into the financial services business to replace the exiting 70-something-year-olds.
Right.
And this is right in the face of the biggest wealth transfer in recorded history. Those two don't seem to line up. What do you
Yeah.
think is the problem?
Well, I think for all intent and purposes, the industry got ahead of everybody, and also there's the industry was really attractive. Excuse me, Mike. Was really attractive to people that were at my age. 50 years ago. I just retired from active duty at 50 and a half years. I thought that'd be enough, and so there were many opportunities for people to come in and learn sales skills, especially if they had an aptitude for it, where they could blossom and grow. Well, during that period of time, other industries like tech companies came along and they took those people and brought them into their. There was no Google, there was no Amazon. There was none of that when I started the field. So that siphoned off a lot of people that heretofore might have been good resources for us.
What do you think the impact of the this technology, and specifically the robo advisor, is going to have? What's the impact it's going to have on the industry? Do you think going forward?
Well, I think like ebbs and flows everywhere, Mike. I think it'll have its appearance. In fact, I'll ask you a question. And by the way, I just wanted to let you know I did a little research myself when I found out that you're a 3-time Taekwondo champion. And you worked with a couple of people I have a great deal of admiration for, Gary Gaston and who's the other one? Oh, Matt Carbone. So,
oh yeah, great guys.
Yeah, I'm sure they think the world of you. And I found also that you're a very infectious person. That's what I learned about you. So, and I've experienced it myself. It's been a pleasure.
Oh, thank you, sir.
So I forgot the question.
Terrific. I have one for you while you're recollecting.
Okay.
Is this something that we need to embrace, this, call it fluidity of advisors changing companies, of people changing industries, of this lack of loyalty and more of an inward-looking selfishness? Are our consumers of the same mind to where we shouldn't think that we're going to have a client forever, and we should be able to be there for the time that we're together and then be okay with clients coming and going? Or do you think that's one of the ebbs and it will flow back to normalcy in a generation?
I think that is that ebbs and flow situation, and I believe it's already started to come back. I know that some companies now, Ameriprise being one of them, has now brought values-based planning into the vernacular of their relationship. So when I saw that, I was thrilled because what I had previously mentioned to you, that was so important to me. So I think the ebbs and flows will always be there in our industry. And I'll bet you can think of times where the industry came out with products that were with a lot of fanfare and then, didn't do so well. And then they were replaced with another one that didn't do so well. And then they were replaced with some that did do well and they became the mainstays. So I think there'll always be a state of fluidity in this. But I think the guiding principle of supporting clients amongst a multitude of knocks on the door that are going to show up for them over their lifetime, I think a great advisor will always be a wonderful resource to those people.
I could not agree more. In fact, I've had firsthand experience. In fact, I lost a finger or two with some of those products that were brought in and they were ushered out with a more improved product line. And Art, I like to remind people that one of the human fallacies or the human problems is that we think linearly.
Yes, we do.
think straight line, but nothing happens linearly. Things happen exponentially, and that's the ebb and flow that you're talking about. So I'm very tickled to get some validation from a senior like yourself in that regard. You mentioned the Taekwondo championship and all of that, and it is true, and those were glorious days. My new thing, though, which actually you could probably be very good at, given your acumen for mountain climbing and adventure, is Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And
I don't know what it is.
Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is more like wrestling, ground defense, or you're not striking and punching and kicking. You're actually grappling is what it's called. So wrestling, judo is kind of mixed in there a little bit. But the bottom line, Art, is not only is it great and athletic and helpful, but you can go at your own pace, and you could defend yourself against a knuckle dragger like me without having to hurt me.
Oh,
that's the beautiful thing. So if you're interested, New York has literally, it's a mecca of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu across the world. It's one of the key places. So you're in good company up there. But I appreciate you bringing that up, and it's nice to walk down memory lane. Can you tell us a little bit about life after American Express and Ameriprise, and more in particular, we see the sign behind you, it says MYT. Tell us about why you started Maximize Your Talents and what your goal is with that company.
Sure. Well, when Mike Woodward gave me that book, I had tried to read Daniel Goleman's first epistle. I mean, it was about 2 inches thick, and I didn't resonate. It was too academic for me, and I love academia, but that was more than what I could tolerate. And then Mike gives me this condensed, rewritten book called Working with Emotional Intelligence. I read it in 3 days. And that spiral notebook, I kept it before any of this. And when I would see, Mike do something really smart, I'd write it down and I'd try to identify the behavior, and then I'd try and teach somebody else. And I had it all broken up into sections. And when I read the book, I realized that my spiral notebook, there were names to all of the things that were in that spiral notebook. So I could throw the spiral notebook away, and I wished I'd never had, but I did. And there are things like self-awareness and empathy and how our brain works that I realized was going to be a great resource to advisors. And so I went to whoever I had to ask. I don't remember at this point. Could we start a pilot? And they said yes. And we started on September 1st of 2001. And I remember sitting on the beach with Deb, with the kids, and enjoying sunsets and saying to her, boy, we're going to have a great year this year. Our recruiting is up, the productivity is up. And I'm sitting there feeling a great calm. And of course, 10 days later, my wife and my daughter and I are sitting in New York on the day before, and to have just a family meal, and because she was going to school there, going to law school. And then I went back to Albany. My wife stayed overnight, went back to the vineyard the next morning. My secretary comes in and she says, you better turn on the TV. And of course, my daughter's 20 blocks away, and you can imagine the fear that you could experience. And then I didn't know where my wife was. I couldn't reach her. Turns out she was on a bus, and the bus had to stop wherever it was because of that event. And I remember about 2 hours later when I got a call from a phone number that I didn't know, but it was my wife who borrowed a cell phone from someone whose phone was working to let me know that she was okay. And I don't mind telling your audience, I put my head in my hands. You can tell it's still it's still there, and I cried because I didn't know what else to do. And so everybody's accounted for, and I now realize we just launched this project. So I call everybody and say, look, we just lost 11 people in the tower. I don't know what's going on. Let's put this off, to another time, because it was a hypothetical situation I was working with. I didn't know it was going to work, thus the pilot. Everybody stayed in that program.
Wow.
And they stayed until they finished. And you could ask them today, did it help? Without question. So that was one of many pilots that we did up until 2009. And everyone proved the same thing, that you can use this knowledge about how the brain works to help you navigate the stressful experiences in life. And we've been teaching people that stuff, and it's been well received, and we're thrilled with it.
You know, Art, thank you for sharing that story. Appreciate it very much. And I can remember, as I'm sure everyone listening can, that where they exactly were when they heard the news. And I was fortunate enough a couple weekends ago to actually go to the Freedom Tower and go up with my 8th grade daughter in her class and see the skyline from the top of the new tower, and to pay tribute to the memorial that was there. You know, it's part of our country, part of our history. I spent, you know, almost a dozen years in the Army. So
Oh, wow.
very significant to me. And, you know, I appreciate you sharing that with us. You know, I went to your website and I printed off this report that you put out there. And if the listeners want to get this, it's at www.maximizeyourtalent.com, www.maximizeyourtalent.com. And this is the research paper, the executive summary. It's terrific. And it just validates what you're talking about, your theory. And I'll just read a couple of the stats. You know, the average participant of your program showed a productivity increase of 24%.
Isn't that crazy?
that is significant. Some would say that's awesome.
Not as awesome as you, but
that word might be a little bit overused on my show. But you know, but here's the thing that I really want to ask you about in detail, though. Here's what it was talking about. You were not only just increasing GDC, but quality of life, anger, and physical vitality measures also demonstrated statistically significant beginning to end positive change. That's one of your bedrocks, is this emotional intelligence, not just analytical or financial intelligence. Can you please tell us about this emotional intelligence and how we can benefit?
Sure. There are two major players in the field that have testing instruments. One is Ruven Baran from the University of Texas, and Daniel Bowman has one. It's in his books. You can just Google it, and they're there. And the competencies, when you look at them and you match them against each other to see if there's overlap, there's probably about 25 competencies that make up the world of emotional intelligence. And some of them are more pointed and more dramatic than others. For example, one of the things that we try to help our clients with is to understand how the brain works. So, you know, if you go back 10,000 years and you look at that brain and you look at today's brain, it's virtually the same brain. There's a tiny, tiny sliver that's changing in that brain because of technology. And that's only occurred in the last 20 years or so. So it's the same brain. And so for your audience's knowledge, it has a negative bias to it. Why? Because 10,000 years ago, when you woke up, there was no place to go have breakfast. You had to forage to find whatever you could eat that day, water that was appropriate to drink, you know, something to hunt that you could kill and cook. And every day you were looking over your shoulder, wondering where are you going to eat, what's after me, what saber-toothed tiger is looking for me for dinner. And that negativity bias is there to protect us. The problem with the negativity bias is that today, when we realize that there's a stressful experience in front of us, it produces the same chemical as it did 10,000 years ago, and it's called cortisol. And it jacks us up to slay the saber-toothed tiger. But today, somebody cuts us off on the highway, and the same mechanism goes into play, and we want to indicate, you know, where heaven is by pointing to it using one of our fingers. So, and if I ask you, well, I'll ask you the question I ask everybody. What do you think the amount of negative self-talk do you think we deliver to ourselves every day? What percentage of the thinking is negative?
I would say the majority. If you ask for an actual percentage, I would say that the average person, I would say 70% of it is negative. And I have done a little bit of reading on this, so forgive me if I'm mistaken.
You're all over it. You're all over it. 70% to 90% I've read between the two, so you're on it. So if that's the real world, and it's there because it's supposed to be there like it was 10,000 years ago, we as humans need mechanisms to say, what am I going to do about that negative thought when it comes into play? Because if we go too far into it, it damages our capacity to think. The brain's going to do one of two things when a stressful situation occurs. It's going to outthink the problem, or it's going to try and out-emote the problem. If you allow it to out-emote the problem, the blood's going to run from your prefrontal cortex right behind your forehead and run down to the amygdala and say, Art wants a cortisol shot because a saber-toothed tiger is going to eat him any minute. Well, that saber-toothed tiger is being camouflaged by a guy that cuts me off on a highway. So if I let myself do that, the cortisol comes flushing in. Unlike 10,000 years ago when I finished slaying the saber-toothed tiger, all that cortisol came out of my pores. But when we get anxious, excuse me, when we get angry and we get that jolt of cortisol, it layers inside of us and layers inside of us and layers inside of us. And it's like a game being played between your brain and your heart. And the heart is saying, stop throwing that stuff down on me. And your brain keeps saying, but Art wants cortisol because he's afraid of something, or something dangerous is going to happen. And the danger thing is, the printer didn't work. or the coffee that we like wasn't there, so we smack our coffee cup on the countertop and break our favorite cup. So those are the things that cause all of us today to have more exposure to chronic stress. The dings on our phones, the dings on our tablets, the dings on our computers. And at home, if I'm watching TV, that stupid TV now tells me who's calling me. I have to look at that stupid thing and see that, some robot trying to sell me or tell me how horrible Social Security is, and they're gonna take me out of the Social Security program if I don't call them right this minute. So that kind of distraction is a real challenge for us today. And so, it kind of leads me to the begging for people to, do things to offset that, which is what we teach. Like meditation is a typical thing that we teach.
I'm going to ask you in detail about a couple of those, maybe usable techniques or things that people can take and use right now. But I looked into your work a bit, and you mentioned on there that 50% of our happiness is genetically driven.
Yeah.
You mentioned that only 10% is based on our circumstances, and then 40% of our happiness is determined by the choices that we make. Now, yeah. I know that the 40% is where you make your bread and butter.
Yep.
But I got to ask you, 50%. So there's like half of my happiness is out of my control, is really just genetic. That to me is very I'm a little bit of a control freak, so I want to have more control than just giving that 50% up to, call it the genetic lottery. Excuse me, genetic lottery.
Did you ever read the book Outliers by Gladwell, Malcolm Gladwell?
Yep.
Okay. In the prologue of that book is a story about Roseto, Pennsylvania. And that community came into being as a byproduct of the challenges of industrialization back in Italy. And there were many people who had more jobs and things were growing, and there weren't enough opportunities for people. So people left Italy and they came to New York. They didn't like New York. It was too busy for them. They liked more, the rural areas. They settled in a crossroads, if you will. I don't even think it had a name at that point. And but there was a quarry area nearby where they could work, and that was what they used to do as work. So, so over time, that community became Roseto. And the amazing thing about Roseto is that it was a replication of the world that they lived in Italy. Have you ever been to Italy?
I have not. I'm not. I've been to Europe.
Okay. So many Italians have a really more casual look at life. They're not so intense, especially in the more rural areas, but it's uniform almost all over. And so genetically, they transformed or transported the environment that they had there to Roseto. 2,200 people in the community, 20 civic organizations to support them. They went to church every single week. In all the years that the place is there, there's never been a nun or a priest that came out of the place. So the church was not a religious, fervent experience. It was a get-together experience. After dinner, families lived, grandparents, parents, and children in the same house. So there was lots of parenting going on and support for the young people growing up. People would walk arm in arm at night after dinner, up and down the street, cousins, nephews, et cetera, et cetera. They built a wonderful community for themselves. And so genetically, they gained because the death rate in Roseto was off the charts. When researchers finally went there to figure out why were these people living longer? Because they were happier and they had less stress. They had more support. So that 50% can be a joyful thing. And it kind of challenges us to make sure that the environment we create for our families is full of joyfulness. And if we have time, I'll tell you about a story about the difference between how we treat our children. It's a lovely example. And so now the 40%, so let's say somebody comes into our work, and of that 50%, let's say that it's like mixed. It's not total joyfulness and total happiness, but it's okay happiness and it's okay joyfulness. Now the 40% that we give them makes a tipping point. And so now they walk away 6 months later. I sat in an executive's office in New York, and I had worked with him for 6 or 7 months on a project, and it included the work from MYT. And so he knew I was there. My job with him was finished. He knew I was there. He asked me if I could stop at his office when I was leaving, which I did. And so I got into his office, and he said, someone wants to speak to you. And I looked around. There was nobody but him. She says, no, it's a phone call. So he makes his dial, and he says, hi. And he says, yes, he's here. And he hands me the phone. And I said, hi, this is Art Delorenzo. And he says, well, I'm so-and-so's wife. I want you to know something. When he came home and told me that he was going to get this kind of support, I called my lawyer the next day and told him to stop the divorce papers.
Oh, wow.
So 6 months later, we give this person back a husband and a father that they were lovingly anxious to have. And to my knowledge, he's still doing well. So there's how that 40% tipping point on whatever he brought to the table made a difference in his life.
Well, congratulations on that holistically. And then also thank you for that work. Now, you mentioned we give them back in 6 months. So I just wanted to maybe introduce everyone to your program here. And essentially, you'll do it better than I do it, but essentially it's you start with a one-day meeting, and then you have 6 months of, I don't know if you call it accountability or shaping Tell us about the program, Art, please.
Sure, those are great words. Thank you. We do actually start with some pre-testing. So before anybody, like the next one is July 26th in Manhattan. We only have 2 seats left. So I want to give full disclosure that we'll probably fill that in the next day or two. So of that, and so when those people kind of sign up, we send them testing instruments. And they complete those testing instruments, and those testing instruments allow us to know what their EQ basis is, or what their base of knowledge is. And then they come to the workshop, and we teach them some really deep fundamental skills on mind management, mind skills. We teach them about the brain, how the brain works, et cetera, et cetera. Then we send them home, and then every week after that, for no more than 15 minutes to a half an hour, they're meeting with somebody that's going to help them manage their change in behavior. We invite them to each have 2 observers, one at work, one away from work. And we train the observers on how to give feedback to the participant. So here's week 1 after the full day workshop. They get feedback from their observer 1. Next week, they get feedback from observer 2. Then next week, they have a half hour with our coaches, private, face-to-face, Zoom to Zoom, face-to-face. And then it starts again. Observer 1, observer 2, and then coach, half-hour coaching session. And it repeats itself over and over and over. What are we using? Using repetition to change the neural pathways that they had built for themselves. We're layering over. We're putting some cement over the old ones, sealing those behaviors, and putting new ones on top of it that allow someone to change their behavior. At the end of the program, and by the way, there's 2 team calls where we get the team together. No coaches this time. It's just myself. I facilitate it, and I get them to talk to each other about what's working well, what are they struggling with, and then we try and adapt, and we try to match some of them up. When we finish the program, we post-test. And that's where all the data came from that you gave everybody earlier. That's how we knew.
Well, I congratulate you again. And, one of the problems with the motivational, life-changing seminars is that you leave your reality, you go to this controlled or utopic place that's out there, and you get all fired up, and yes, you're going to change, you're going to do this, and you're going to do that. And then you go back home to reality, and everyone has got their heels dug in, and they're like, oh boy, he went to a seminar that's just waited out. In a month, we'll be back to normal. So your strategy there, by helping the participants over 6 months to really implement a change, is most likely, in my opinion, why you're so successful with it.
That's what they tell us.
Yeah, I applaud it. And then even the idea of having what I call a mastermind group, where you're getting everybody together to talk about what's working for them and work on each other's businesses, phenomenal. I do know that you do another one in November. So if listeners, this broadcast probably won't come out in time for them to get on the next one, but in November they might be able to take part in it. However, Kelly mentioned to me, your awesome assistant, that one of your co-founder, Dr. Fred, by the way, Fred Luskin, PhD from Stanford University, like that's hard. He'll be conducting a 2-hour workshop. So if folks want to just kind of get a sample or get a taste of what you're talking about, it'll be a 2-hour workshop on Thursday in July. They can find more information about that on your website. Do you want to comment about that at all?
Yeah, it brings you back to academia. It really does. He's a very forward-thinking individual. He's done a tremendous amount of work, and he's working now in Colombia with the 2 entities that have been trying to kill each other for the last, I don't know how many years. He's working with them on how to forgive each other for what things have happened. He's done the same thing in Northern Ireland. And so in this particular case, he's going to be talking about how to manage relationships, how, the the words to use, the skills to use to navigate conflict. And he just did one. In fact, if any of your folks would like to see the one that he did at the end of March on resilience, all they have to do is just send us an email, and we'll send them the video, or we'll put the video up for maybe 4 or 5 days on YouTube, and then they can watch it if they'd like. It's a great education.
That would be terrific.
And people can just, if they would like to see it live, it's streamed. So you can just, for, I don't know, $30 or $40, whatever it is, you can watch it live, and they can all see me again too, because I'll be there.
Well, that would be a bonus. You're very substantiated. This is not a lot of hocus pocus. You have research. You've done your own papers. You've got Dr. Fred substantiating the work and doing some very important work, by the way, so I appreciate that. And recently, the American Journal research article basically validated what you're talking about. Can you tell us about this? I know you're a very humble guy, but tell us what happened. You basically got a big stamp of approval and legitimacy from a pretty big company or entity.
It surprised us. It came out of nowhere, but the American Journal of Health Promotions wanted to, kind of tear our research apart, put it back together again, and kind of review it. And when we did, they just notified us, I think 2 or 3 weeks ago, that they accepted the article that we had written to validate, and I guess they do their own checking. And so it's going to be coming out in 2 or 3 months, and when it does, we'll probably just go on Good Morning America and tell everybody, or I'm kidding, of course, but we'll tell anybody that will listen. Even my doorman.
I would not be surprised if I looked up and saw you on Good Morning America, not only from the work that you've done, but but your position there in the community as well. So appreciate that. You mentioned earlier that you have this story about how to treat our children, and as a parent myself, I know that's a very important and relevant and timely topic. In fact, I had a little spat with my 13-year-old youngest daughter this morning.
Oh boy!
So all ears are open, I'm sure, on the line. And just a reminder, we have wholesalers, financial advisors, and other financial services pros. So these are your brothers and sisters and kids and grandkids in the business. Art, help us out.
Okay, so it's a interesting story. It's a happy story too. So for my wife's significant birthday, we decided to go. She wanted to go to Wimbledon, so we go to Wimbledon and we take the shuttle over to France, and we drive down to Cinque Terre in Italy. It's 5 fishing villages, and when we get there, we stayed in a town, 6 minutes away from Lerci, where you get the boat to go out to these fishing villages. And we have a lovely dinner. And we next morning we get on this little tram that picks us up. It's goes back and forth, and we only go a handful of minutes. And I realized I left something back at the hotel. So I said, Deb, go and get the tickets. I'll go back, get what I needed, and I did. And so I come out. The tram is there. I go to pay the guy again. He says, no pago, no pago. You don't have to pay because you already paid. So laissez-faire attitude of our Italian heritage is in full bloom. Now I realize that this little tram has a different mode than when we first set out. Now it's the school bus as well. So it starts picking up kids with their parents and get on, and the kids again. These are all toddlers, 5, 6 years old, 4, 5, 6 years old. We come to one corner, and there's 2 mothers there. The doors open up. There's 2 mothers holding 2 kids, and both of the kids are wailing at their mothers. They don't want to go to school. They hate school. They don't want to go. They wish they could stay home and play with Papa or play in the garden or whatever. They don't want to go to school. So they both get on the bus. The first woman takes her arm and puts it around her son, and she speaks to him. and she's stroking his shoulder and telling him, non preoccupare, tutto è bene, everything's going to be okay. Giovanni's going to be there when you get to school. You can play soccer with him or football with him. And she just goes through this loving, calming experience. The other woman starts berating her son. You're no good. You're just like your father. You make a mess out of everything. And everybody in the bus is just, startled by this little experience. They get to school. First kid jumps off, sees Giovanni, and off they go and play. The second kid gets off the bus and he turns to his mother and says, I hate you too, and I don't want to go to school, and you should take me back home. And so I watched this thing from a kind of a scientific perspective to see, what's going to happen. And that was the end of it. So I just kind of make a mental note of it. 2 years later, I'm sitting in Philadelphia, and a research comes on, and he talks about an experience, a research experience they had, where they brought women in with little toddlers, 4, 5, 6 years old. So it's ringing a bell to me right away. And they say to the woman, you, in order to get into the research project, you had to have paperwork that you had to do. You have to be working, a working mom. And they provided a desk with computers and phones and everything that they needed. But you had to bring your child with you. And there was a whole array of toys and books that they could read while, they were there. However, there was one little treat for the child, and the treat for the child was a box. And inside the box was a special treat for them. And it's all ribboned up and, bundled up. And when your mom finishes her work, you can have this treat. So there's the first person that comes behind the glass, and scientists are sitting behind their glass, the typical glass window. And the first child comes up and after playing for a while comes to its mother and says, Mom, can I open my box now? I mean, well, they told us you can't open the box now. You have to wait. But she puts her arm around it and she kisses him and says, you want me to play with you for a few minutes? And we played, and then he said, okay, you have to do, because Mom's got to do her work. And this was the banter between the two of them for her duration of her session. Next session, woman comes in, all the paperwork, little kid goes through the same thing, plays for a while, comes up to the mother, don't bother me. I have work to do. There's plenty of stuff there for you to do. Go do your work. So you can, without boring your audience, that was the flavor of that experience. What they were doing, what these scientists were doing, was measuring the hippocampus, that little piece in the back of the brain that influences emotional intelligence. And what they found years later was that the child who had the lovingness and the kindness and the stroking and their hippocampus was twice the size, or larger, much larger than the person who was receiving this rebuttal and this negativity on a regular basis. So my point is that stress is contagious. And if you give it out to someone who brings it to you and you have this conflict, it is not a good remedy for a hale and hearty old age. What would be better is that when conflict comes at you, that you have skills that you can use with your mind to say, I am going to outthink this problem, and this is the choice I'm going to make today. I have 5 or 6 things that I can do. I'm going to say to myself, for example, for your audience, I'm going to practice a new skill. The mere fact that you say to yourself, I'm going to practice a new skill, stops the emotional outburst that would counteract, counteract, not in that way, the negative energy that's coming at you. So if you, in fact, provide empathy, saying things like, gee, you're really angry. I can appreciate how angry you are. You must be feeling terrible. Inside, you may be frustrated, but if you use that tact, you don't get excited to the point where it becomes a real battle situation. You, in fact, alleviate the issue. You alleviate that strain. And minutes later, people will say to you, wow, you were so calm. And you know, I was angry. I'm sorry I was so angry. I should have thought better about what I said. So that's what you get when you practice emotional intelligence. Long story. I'm sorry.
No, I have, I'm just reflecting, as I'm sure all the audience is that I have some work to do on that myself. So you mentioned earlier meditation. And meditation is, in my life over the last year, has really became, it's popping up everywhere. Everywhere that I'm looking, people are promoting and saying, hey, meditation works terrifically. For the listeners that maybe haven't done it or aren't using that technique, can you just kind of give us the snapshot of how to do it or how we
Sure.
can learn more about it?
Sure, and there's no perfect answer. Everybody meditates their own way. They start with some fundamentals. One of the most primary fundamentals is breathing. You know, taking a nice big deep breath through your nose. I was doing it before we spoke today. In fact, Kelly and I finished doing some work, and I had about 5 minutes left, and I said to her, I think I'm just going to meditate for 5 minutes. And that's all I did. I just sat by myself, closed my eyes, started breathing deeply in through my nose. I filled my belly with that air, and then I slowly exhaled it out through my mouth. And my feet were solidly on the ground. My hands were resting in my lap. And I deliberately used my body's mechanism, which is there for any of us, anytime we want to use it, to calm myself and to reassure myself. I don't give presentations like this every day, but I speak 2 or 3 times a week, and I do the same thing before each one of those. And it gives me a chance to think more clearly when I'm having a dialogue with somebody. So meditation, and if you repeat that breathing exercise, for example, a number of times, if you can get to 10 minutes to start your day, it is a blessing, because that cortisol that wakes us up in the morning, it's a nice way to get rid of that little residue cortisol from the day before or the night before. And it gives you kind of a clean slate to start the day. If you can get to 20 minutes, you will increase your focus for an entire day with 20 minutes of meditation. And if anybody would like to have the research on that, we have it. You could just ask us, and we'd be glad to send it to you.
Art, I appreciate that. As you were saying that, though, I thought, okay, I can sit up and first thing in the morning and do some deep breathing and kind of grounding. If I go 20 minutes, Art, I fell back to sleep.
That's not uncommon. We hear it often.
Yeah, that's terrific. Okay, so meditating and calming. What else can we do? What else can we do to improve our emotional intelligence before we come out to the mastery program?
Okay, be grateful. You woke up this morning. I woke up this morning. Some people did not wake up this morning. You walked. I walked. I walked to the grocery store to get some fresh fruit. I walked back. Some people who woke up can't walk. So we spend a lot of time being jealous of what somebody else has and forgetting that we have so much. I'm looking in your eyes right now. I can see. I see that wonderful American flag behind your shoulders. That's, given what we've seen about the 75th anniversary of D-Day, I mean, if you can't come up with a tear over something like that, you have a chromosomal defect, I think. I don't know. I shouldn't have said that. That's probably not fair. But feeling. Oftentimes, my wife sleeps on her right side. She always goes to sleep on my shoulder. And then as the night unfolds, she rolls over and I roll over, and But in the morning, I always wake up first, and she's always on her right side, and she's almost breathing on my shoulder, not on it, but close. And I take my left hand and I put it on her left hip because it just settles there. And I just say to myself, I'm lucky. 2,000 238 weeks, 2 days ago, we were married. That's a bunch of weeks that I've had that joyfulness in my life. And I oftentimes will match her breathing to mine. And so as she's breathing, I'll breathe the same thing. I feel the warmth, on her hip. And I just lay there and I say, this is going to be a good day. So gratitude, being grateful for what we have, our country, the profession that we grew up in that has allowed us to do the things we've done, trips all over the world. And, for all of us, not just me, but for all of us, just being grateful. Even, it's an old Italian habit, but before, we ate, we said a blessing. And it's not unique to Italians, but, just look, you don't have to even pray. You could just look at your meal and say, wow, somebody doesn't have a meal. I'm lucky. There are thousands of kids that are going to die today all over the world because they can't have a glass of water, a tumbler with 6 or 8 ounces of water. If they could have 2 or 3 ounces, they would live another day. So my begging would be to realize what's around you and be grateful for it.
Powerful stuff, sir. Powerful stuff. Thank you for that very much. Appreciate it myself, and I'm sure the audience does as well. I want to take you around the corner towards the finish line here. And I always ask these 2 signature questions to the guests on the show. There's no wrong answer, Art. So
okay.
Didn't have time to study. It's kind of a pop test. But here's the first question. Art, if you picked up the telephone and on the other end of the line was 30-year-old Art Delorenzo, what advice would you give to your younger self?
I would say that I would need to learn EQ earlier in life. I was well into my 50s, late 50s, when this whole world unfolded. So I would say that would be something that if I had that sooner, I think I'm a pretty healthy guy. I'm very grateful for that, but I think that would have been my choice.
Awesome. And hopefully young Art would listen. Sometimes we're not able to hear until later. Second question, and this is a little bit more wide open, and I'm maybe going to hear your comments. But Art, if you could have any superpower, any legitimate superhero superpower, which one would you choose and what would you do with it?
It's a good question. I think I would try to be more of a Gandhi, more of a Mother Teresa, more of a person that just devoted more of his life to, helping other people and doing the best that I could to, help them get through, the only life they're going to have, and as best as is possible.
Art, I appreciate your answers to those, and I appreciate your somber demeanor, and maybe more than I can say even. So, thank you very much for all of the, the wisdom that you've imparted on us today. Thank you. I'm sure I can talk on the behalf of all of the wholesalers and financial advisors and clients that you've dealt with over the years and say thank you for your work. I'm sure they appreciate you as much as I do. We all wish you much fortune, both now and in the future, as well as success. I think you're on an honorable mission, and definitely look forward to keeping in touch and watching you blossom. As we say here on the Awesome Wholesaler Experience podcast, it's about the journey, Art, and we wish you well on yours. I do look forward to seeing you again soon. And a huge thank you to everyone that's tuning in today. And if you haven't already done so, hit that subscribe button and even join the notification squad by clicking on that little bell to make sure that you never miss an episode like the one we had today with Art. You know, here at the Awesome Wholesaler Experience podcast, we're on a mission to get 1,000 new subscribers this summer. So we're going to need your help to make that happen. Please subscribe and share the show with your colleagues and friends. Thanks, everyone, again, for tuning in, for supporting the show. And, of course, thank you for being awesome. Good night, everybody.